ordinary citizens of this country choose Ken Whitaker, a former public servant, a former governor of the central bank, as their choice as Irishman of the 20th century. I don't think he needed any more or greater accolade than that.
The production of the blueprint for economic change, economic development in the late 1950s, and the implementation of that. And he made sure that those plans were actually made it into policy. And that led to an opening up of the Irish economy away from protectionism towards trade and welcoming foreign direct investment.
Ken Whitaker was governor between 1969 and 1976. During that period, Ireland went through a very large set of economic challenges. We had the oil shock of 1973. We had the challenge of rising living standards, but also rising inflation in the context of a fixed exchange rate with sterling. And reading through his memoir of that time period, I was struck by the similarities of the challenges facing the central bank at that point and the challenges we face today. One of the benefits of our new building on Northwell Quay is that there will be a dedicated archival space which the public can visit to conduct research, to learn about the bank. And I think one of the flagship archival materials that we will have is the memoir Governor Whitaker wrote about his time in office.
We have his correspondence, his public speeches, and a few other items. Specifically, one obvious item is a memoir he wrote about his time as governor of the central bank in 1979. This was never published, unfortunately, but has been kept safe in our archives. The memoir deals with all the challenges of the time. Specifically, fighting inflation in the 1970s was one of the big issues. And he memorably compares fighting inflation to being like fighting sin. Everyone is opposed to it, but no one wants to take any measures to tamp down on it that might be unpopular.
Over that time period, the bank essentially greatly expanded its mandate in terms of running credit policy in the economy, in terms of making sure that the funding of the government bond market was smooth, in terms of its advisory role. And then internally in the bank, of course, where we sit today in our Dame Street building, a lot of the planning for that building took place at that time. Expanding the way the bank was managed to include a greater role for senior management, that was part of his objective at the time. And let me also point out the role of women in the central bank.
Ken Whitaker ensured that we had equal rights and equal pay, and more importantly, equal promotional opportunities which were not available to female staff before his arrival. So I'll tell you, all the ladies in the bank were absolutely delighted by the arrival of Ken Whitaker.
His planned economic development inspired Irish businesses and gave Irish people confidence. And this was at a time when things were very grim in the 1950s in Ireland, massive outward immigration and huge unemployment. But he gave businesses and the Irish public confidence that they could do far better than this, and that they could trade in the global economy and prosper in the global economy.
The central bank established the Whitaker Lecture as its flagship named lecture, which takes place every 2 years. Next year's lecture, I think, is especially fitting because the 2017 Whitaker Lecturer will be Frances Duran. Frances was one of the first female economists in the bank in the mid-1970s. Her research work has been on the performance of the Irish economy, the policies that are needed to help Ireland prosper in an integrated world economy. This, of course, originated in many ways with Ken Whitaker's vision in the 1950s.
I think he's had a profound impact on the Irish economy and Irish society. He led the march in the late 1950s and 1960s away from protectionism and a very inward-looking economy towards free trade and a much more outward-looking economy and a welcoming of foreign direct investment. And that set the seeds for Ireland's growth in the decades that followed.
I think there is one thing that Ken Whitaker wrote that epitomises the ethos he brought to public service, both as central bank governor, as secretary of the Department of Finance, and indeed in all the other areas that he headed up during the course of his public service life. And I would like to read out his words. And he wrote, "There are values, moral and intellectual, which are higher than just mere economics. But it makes for a happier and more contented society if everybody has some basic share in wealth and well-being." That is the ethos that permeated his public service career.